What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with another NFL video. And now that the NFL draft is over, I can shift my focus to the 2020 NFL season and starting to rank some of these teams and thinking about how they're actually going to perform during the regular season, potentially the playoffs, and so on. In this video, I'm going to rank every single team in the NFC conference from number 16 all the way till number 1. What I did in this video and what I did with these rankings, a little bit different than what I've done in the past. I put together a set of criteria for each conference. So I ranked them from 1 to 16 in terms of the quarterback position, their coaching, and then each on the offensive and defensive sides of the football. So offensive line, weapons, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, all in one category. Defensively, I looked at the front seven, I looked at the secondary. Each category had a grade from 1 to 16. I added that up and you got your collective list and total. I did not mess around with the list after I found out what the grade for each team was. So pretty much this strips away any previous bias I would have about any of these teams or the ones that I felt like maybe would have been a little bit higher, a little bit lower. I just took the grade that I gave them and that's how these rankings are going to turn out. So maybe it's going to be a little bit wacky to you. Maybe it's not. Maybe you're going to love these lists. But before I give you my 16 to number 1 in the NFC conference, make sure that you do Gronk spike the like button and subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more NFL videos just like this. Also, comment your opinion below. What do you think of my NFC rankings? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? How do you actually like this format for my rankings? Let me know in the comment section below. Coming in at number 16, last place in the NFC, a team that I did not expect would finish last in my rankings, the New York Giants. The New York Giants totaled a score of 80 and a quarterback coach score of 27. Now, not the worst quarterback coach score, but the worst collective team score on my rankings. And really, I think the reason for that, reason number 1 is the Giants really don't have one elite unit that sticks out. It's not the pass rush. It's not the front seven. It's not the secondary. It's not the coaching. It's not the quarterback. It's not the weapons. It's not the offensive line. The Giants across the board are just a pretty average football team. At the quarterback position, Daniel Jones, I love the way he played in his rookie season. I think if he can elevate this team in his sophomore season, then we're talking about a team that could take some people by surprise. Offensively, they have some weapons to work with. They have, in my opinion, the best running back in football in Saquon Barkley. They have one of the better slot receivers in the game in Sterling Shepard. Golden Tate is not a bad receiver himself. And Evan Ingram is an extremely talented tight end who just needs to stay healthy. Offensive line-wise, I think they've improved. I've always liked Kevin Zeitler at guard. I really like the pick in the first round, Andrew Thomas. I think Gettleman did a good job and has done a good job over the last couple of years at building this offensive line. I think that's the best thing he's done as the GM of the Giants. Defensively, the Giants just don't really have an elite unit in the front seven. They're not really an elite pass rushing team. They really don't have a great group of linebackers, and their secondary still needs some work. I really like the Xavier McKinney pick in the second round of the draft. I think Bradbury was a solid pickup in free agency, but when comparing it to the rest of the NFC, it still doesn't really stack up with the elite teams. If Bradbury can be a true number 1 corner, that will elevate the rest of the players around him to play a lot better. If McKinney can be the leader in the back end they need, that will really help. And if Blake Martinez can play well in the middle of their defense alongside David Mayo, then we could be talking here. And Lorenzo Carter, I liked when he came out of the draft. I loved him. And hopefully he can elevate at the edge position because they really don't have that number 1 pass rusher that a good defense needs. They lost Marcus Golden. He hasn't re-signed. So I don't know where the sacks or pressure is coming from with this defense. Leonard Williams, they brought him back. Dalvin Tomlinson, Dexter Lawrence. It's a solid front 3, and they'll be good versus the run. I just question if they can get enough pressure versus opposing passers. So the Giants, I like their roster. I like the direction they're headed. I just feel like they're very average. They don't have a unit that stands out, and that's probably why they're last in these rankings. Coming in at number 15, second last in the NFC, is the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers have the worst coach quarterback score of any team in the NFC at 30. Actually, the worst, tied with Jacksonville in the entire league. 30 for the quarterback coach score. Collectively, they're just 2 points ahead of the New York Giants at 78 points. The Panthers are in rebuild mode. It's kind of what we're expecting. I don't expect this team to be great. And honestly, if I would have ranked this without the ranking system that I made up, I really feel like they might have been last in the NFC. A couple other teams come to mind, but Carolina is a team that I just feel like they're okay with not being very good this year. And whenever you're okay with not being very good, I just think you're not going to be very good, if that makes sense. When looking at their roster, I think their offense is actually pretty underrated in terms of their skill positions. DJ Moore had an awesome season last year. Curtis Samuel is an electrifying playmaker with the ball in his hands. Robbie Anderson is a nice deep threat to stretch the field. And of course, you have Christian McCaffrey, who's arguably the best back in the league, especially when it comes to receiving and catching the football out of the backfield. Teddy Bridgewater, he's just fine to me. I don't think he's actually an upper echelon starter. I don't think he's a guy that you really want as your starting quarterback. He's more of a bridge quarterback, in my opinion, and I don't feel like he's a long-term solution for Carolina. Offensive line-wise, Russell Okung, that trade for Turner was interesting, to say the least. I understand bringing in a tackle, but you just got older at that position. Now, in looking at the talent across the board, Matt Paredes is a good player at center, and Moton's actually underrated at right tackle. But the guard positions, I'm not so sure about. We'll have to see how they play this season, and maybe we're talking about an underrated Carolina offensive line and offense in general. I think they can move the ball. I think they can score points. My problem with Carolina is mostly on their defense. They have a lot of young players. They have a very young nucleus on defense, and they're losing Luke Kuechly. I mean, the best linebacker of the last decade. They lost multiple pass rushers. Brian Burns is a stud, but who is going to create pressure other than Brian Burns? Is Quan Short the same player after the injury? Is Derek Brown going to be that force right away? I actually like what they've done with the defensive line. I like Weatherly as well as a free agency pickup that I think went under the radar. But you look at the secondary, and I think this has to be one of, if not the worst, secondary in the entire NFC conference. Carolina, they just have a lot of unproven players. Really, outside of Trey Boston, they have nobody that I would say, hey, that guy's for sure a good player and he's going to produce for this defense. You know, Dante Jackson's been crazy, like a roller coaster up and down with his play. He has a lot of potential, but he just needs to be a little bit more mentally sharp. They have a lot of young talent. That young talent could be good. They could not be good. The jury is out with the Carolina defense. Now, if Chin and Pride and Brown and all these players they added on this defensive side of the football are studs, then we're talking about a team that could maybe of anybody have the highest ceiling defensively and also the lowest floor. So it's an extremely interesting, intriguing unit for me going into the 2020 season. Can Shaq Thompson take over for Luke Kuechly? That's the question. Do they have a true number 2 corner? That's another question they have to answer. Matt Rule has a very large task in front of him. The number 14 team in the NFC shocked me, honestly. I was low on the Rams, but I did not expect them to come in third last in the NFC. The Los Angeles Rams come in at number 14 in the NFC, which is an absolute decline from going to the Super Bowl just a couple seasons ago and being pretty competitive in that game and also playing decently well last year. They weren't a terrible team last season, but they had a completely crazy offseason full of players leaving, players that they've counted on in big spots. And the Rams are going to look a lot different from that team that not only went to the Super Bowl, but the team that they had last year, really. I mean, outside of Jared Goff, Aaron Donald, and a couple of other guys that are foundational pieces to this team, this roster is a lot different, crazy different. And yes, they still have Sean McVay, But some of the areas that the Rams were elite in, they no longer are elite in those areas. Now, the Rams scored a 20 quarterback coach grade, which is actually pretty decent. It's pretty average overall because Sean McVay is a really good coach. But as most of you guys know, I'm not super high on Jared Goff. Now, as a team, they scored a 72, which is a lot higher than second worst Carolina Panthers. They're closer to some of these average teams in the NFC than they are the bottom of the NFC. Some of the areas that the Rams were dominant in, like the wide receiver position, they lost Brandon Cooks. That's going to take away a deep threat, a stretch the field receiver. How much can they count on the intermediate and short passing game of Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods? That's a big question. Offensive line-wise, they're the worst in this conference to me. They were horrendous last season, especially run blocking-wise, but Andrew Whitworth's only getting older, and the rest of their offensive line is just not very good, and they did nothing to upgrade it. Jared Goff, like I said, is probably closer to the bottom of the quarterbacks in this conference than the top. The running back position is a big question mark now because Todd Gurley is no longer there, and yes, Todd Gurley's not Todd Gurley, but is Cam Akers the guy? I actually like Akers a lot, but he still is unproven. Defensively, I like what they've done with their defensive line. A'Shawn Robinson should help. Michael Brockers, luckily, is back. And Aaron Donald's the best. I mean, he's Aaron Donald. But linebacker position has gone through quite a different look now. Leonard Floyd is a decline from what they had in Dante Fowler, a sack machine a season ago. Clay Matthews is no longer there in the inside. The secondary has lost Roby Coleman, a really effective nickel corner. The secondary also lost Eric Weddle. So, yes, Jalen Ramsey's there, which put them a little bit higher on my list. Really, this team is going through a lot of change, and it's going to take a great coaching performance from Sean McVay to take this team in a very difficult division to the playoffs again in 2020. So, the Rams, surprisingly, are very low in my rankings. Just 1 point higher than the LA Rams. The Chicago Bears slot in at number 13 in the NFC going into 2020. They scored a total of 71 compared to the Rams, 72 points. They had a much lower quarterback coach score, which is a big reason they were this low, 27, which was one of the worst in the entire conference. It was tied with the Giants for the second worst among all teams. And that's pretty reasonable in my opinion. You know, Nagy, I don't know what he is. Is he a great offensive mind? Is he a mastermind? Or is he kind of a fraud? I'm not sure. We'll have to see this season. Nick Foles, to me, even if he gets the start over Mitch Trubisky, is a lower-end starter in the NFC. Maybe he's great in this system, but until he actually plays with his new team, after a real big letdown, being outplayed by Minshew of all quarterbacks last year, I have to see him perform. The weapons, they don't wow me. I like Allen Robinson. I don't love Allen Robinson. Anthony Miller is a solid playmaker. The tight end position, yes, they have 11 tight ends, but are any of them actually good? The running back position, I felt like Montgomery was disappointing, although I think he has talent. And Tariq Cohen is a special playmaker, but they don't really utilize him enough. The offensive line, probably a big reason they rank so low here. The offensive line is pretty bad, and nobody talks about how bad this offensive line is, especially last season. Their tackle position was amongst the worst in the NFL. Their interior is okay, but I want to see them run the football better in 2020. Defensively, they rank very strong. Their secondary is just average to me, though. They don't really have an elite player outside of Eddie Jackson. Their corner position, I felt like Fuller took a big step backward last year. And yes, I like the pick of Jalen Johnson at the cornerback position, but I don't know if he's really going to be an impact player from day one. They also lost Clinton Dix at the strong safety spot, so we'll have to see if they can recover from that. The front seven is excellent, though. It ranked as one of the higher ones in the NFC. They have a very strong interior defensive line with Akeem Hicks leading the way, and we know that they have Khalil Mack and signed Robert Quinn. So I really like their defense. I think their defense could be a top 10 unit this year again, but their offense has a lot of question marks, And can Nagy and Pagano really coach this team really well on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball? Chicago is a team, I think, that has a high ceiling, but I could also see a very low floor for this team depending on their quarterback and offensive line play. They don't wow me in any way, and I do feel like they're probably at a reasonable spot here at number 13. At number 12, the team that I expected to be maybe even last in these rankings, a team that was much higher when I actually went through each position and gave them a grade. The Washington Redskins rank 12th in the NFC according to my criteria. Now, it's weird. It's funny because as you'll see, they rank last in a lot of different categories. They rank last in terms of their secondary, they rank last in terms of the quarterback position, and they rank last in terms of the weapons. But outside of that, the team is pretty solid. And I think a big reason they rank this high is because they have one of the best front sevens in the entire NFL. Not just the NFC, the entire NFL, all 32 teams. This front seven is absolutely loaded, and it's going to be a pain for opposing offensive lines to block. You look at the interior line with Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne. You have Sweat as well. Ioannidis is a really nice interior pass rusher. And of course, you added Chase Young, who's an absolute monster, could have a Nick Bosa type effect on this defense. And Ryan Kerrigan. I brought him up last out of all these players, but he's Ryan Kerrigan still. The linebackers are not excellent, but when you have that pass rush, it's going to take your defense from here to here. And yeah, your corners aren't very good, but at least you added Fuller to the back end, which he's a playmaker. Landon Collins is solid. I don't love their cover ability. If they didn't have that front seven, I think they'd get exposed, but they do have that front seven, so they'll be fine there. I'm looking for someone else outside of Scary Terry McLaurin to stand out offensively. If that's Darius Geis, if that's Harmon Quinn, who is that guy that's going to stand out at the wide receiver, tight end position possibly, or even the running back position? Is Geis finally going to have that healthy season? Is Adrian Peterson going to lead the way? Because if he is, I don't see the high ceiling here. And I just feel kind of bad for Haskins because I don't think he has a lot to work with this season. And I'm not a huge fan of what I saw last year from Haskins, but he, like I said, hasn't had a lot to work with. So hopefully somebody can break out offensively for this team. Offensive line is a little underrated. I will say that about this offense. Even without Trent Williams, they still have a fairly solid unit, especially when it comes to run blocking, and that also helped them in my rankings. So overall, Washington, a team that probably surprised me the most with being as high as they are at number 12 when I thought they would be a little bit lower. They had one of the lower quarterback coach scores as well at number 25, but getting Turner in there as the OC, and of course getting Ron Rivera as their head coach also helped them because I think he's going to coach the absolute heck out of this football team. So at number 12 is the Washington Redskins. At number 11 in my NFC rankings, the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals are a team that I was very intrigued to see where they would rank here according to my criteria, and the Cardinals are somewhere in the middle, maybe a little bit lower than I expected them to be. But the question is, like, how much is Kyler Murray going to improve from year one to year two? I think that's the biggest question, because if all of a sudden Kyler Murray becomes like a top 5 quarterback in the league, all of a sudden this team becomes a lot better in these rankings. Cliff Kingsbury is probably a lot better as a coach than he was last year. And I actually felt like Cliff surprised me with what he was able to do with his offensive scheme, and he was quite creative. I'm expecting good things this year from their offense. Their offensive line still, I felt like, didn't get enough work in the offseason for who they added. And yes, there's maybe a long-term solution at tackle with Josh Jones, but I don't think he's going to be an immediate starter. I like Justin Pugh, but outside of that, I don't really love their line. I think it's inconsistent, but with a quarterback like Kyler Murray who can escape pressure and make magic, it's like Russell Wilson where you don't necessarily need that elite line. So in these rankings, that won't really show. Now, wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins, Fitzgerald, Kirk. I mean, this is a group of weapons that are one of the best in the NFC. Running back wise, Kenyon Drake is really electric out of the backfield as a receiver or a runner and was awesome in this scheme. I expect to be an awesome player again in 2020. The tight end position, they don't really have one that sticks out. We'll see if somebody breaks out at the tight end position for Cliff Kingsbury's offense. Defensively, they improved a lot this offseason, in my opinion, by adding Devondre Campbell, by adding Kennard to the edge position, by adding Isaiah Simmons in the draft. You can play linebacker, safety, corner, whatever. So this defense is better, and Jordan Phillips up front. So every level of their defense is better. Their secondary, if Patrick Peterson can perform like Patrick Peterson, then we're talking about a way better unit than they were last year. But that's the question. Is he still the same guy? Because he didn't really play like it last year. Can their safeties, their young safeties, play better? Budda Baker I like a lot, but can they get something out of the collective whole of their secondary? And I'm really looking for their front seven to be a lot better outside of just Chandler Jones. So I like this team a lot. They have a lot of potential. They're just kind of unproven, so it's hard to really rank them according to criteria, but they're here at number 11, a team that I think a very big wild card. They could potentially be a lot better than where I've ranked them. At number 10 is a team that, according to my criteria and my rankings, are kind of stuck in the middle of no man's land on this list. So at number 11 is Arizona, and they came in with a total of 65 points. The team above Atlanta has 48 points. That's how big of a jump there is between those three teams. Atlanta ranks at number 10 with 58 points. So 7 more than Arizona, but 10 less than the next team on this list, which is pretty wild, right? So Atlanta is kind of that team that I look at according to this, and according to the way I rank them, they're like the average team in this conference. They're probably not going to be amazing, but they're probably not going to be awful. That's the way I'm looking at Atlanta right now. Yes, they still have Matt Ryan. He's still a very good player, but I don't think he's a quarterback that carries football teams, and we've seen that too many times for me to say anything different. When he has a good team, he's really good. When he has a bad team, he's good, but he's not really good, right? Offensively, they lost Sanu last year. They don't really have that number 3 target in the passing game yet, and obviously Hooper left. So the question is, can Hayden Hurst fill in the same way? I don't look at him the same way I look at Hooper as I know what I'm getting from that tight end. Who's going to be that number 3 target? But I love Julio and I love Ridley, and they actually surprisingly ranked lower in the weapons category than I would have thought, especially over the last few seasons where they were one of the best teams in that category. Now, the offensive line was much worse than I thought it would be last year, so I've kind of docked them based on that, but they have a lot of potential, are probably the offensive line in the NFC that I would say they have a very high ceiling, but also they have a very low floor. They're that kind of wild card on the offensive line. And running back Todd Gurley, is he an upgrade from what they had before? Probably, but he's very banged up, and can he stay on the field? Big question there. Defensively, I think they got a lot better. I really like what they've done to their front seven, especially the defensive line. You know, adding Dante Fowler, adding Marlon Davidson, who I felt like was kind of a sleeper in the draft, adding some overall depth to this defensive line that really hasn't had a lot of depth for the last few seasons. I want to say since they really went to the Super Bowl. But having a guy like Fowler to go along with Grady Jarrett is going to take this pass rush to the next level, which is going to help this entire defense. Their secondary is very unproven, especially the corner position, but I love Keanu Neal, and obviously I love Deion Jones at linebacker. So they have some pieces, they have some very talented players, but as a collective whole, they're pretty average at just about every spot on their roster. Coming in at number 9 is the Minnesota Vikings. Now, like I said with Atlanta, this is a team that's much higher than Atlanta, and then once we get to Minnesota, there's like 4 or 5 teams that are very close to each other. Minnesota is kind of the cutoff for these teams that I could see making the playoffs this year, or I feel are very competitive. Now, there's a team like Arizona where I feel like they're a huge wild card and they could potentially come into this mix depending on a couple of different things. But with Minnesota, I definitely see them as probably at least a mediocre team, if not a really good team that can make the playoffs and do some damage in the playoffs. Playmakers are fairly good. You know, Adam Thielen is still there. He's one of the most dynamic slot receivers in the game, and Justin Jefferson along with him. Even though he's a rookie, I think he'll be productive year one. He might not be Diggs, but I think he'll be productive in a different kind of way. And they're shifting the way that they play. Also, Tajay Sharp added in the mix. Don't sleep on him as an upgrade to their number 3 receiver spot from the past when they had like Treadwell and all these bums alongside the other two studs. The tight end position is really good. I think Irv Smith will only get better, and Kyle Rudolph is a solid tight end. Offensive line-wise, they might be a little bit worse than last year, depending on how their young players grow up front, but I don't think they're a bad unit. They're just kind of somewhere in the middle. And Kirk Cousins is, good, but like he's not elite quarterback. And Dalvin Cook's a stud at running back. Madison, I also really like a lot. So they have a really good run game. Passing game is, depending on the opponent, depending on the matchups, can be very explosive, but also can be shut down as we've seen in the past. Defensively, I'm uncertain about their defensive line. Is Danielle Hunter going to be their only legitimate pass rusher off the edge, or are they going to get some help from somewhere else? Because Everson Griffin is a free agent. Will he be back? That's the question. Pierce is a really good run defender, but not necessarily that pass rusher. And I do feel like they're lacking the depth they've had over the last couple of years on the defensive line. Linebackers still good. I like Kendricks a ton, and Barr is a solid athlete. Secondary is going through a complete transformation, and really depending on how these young corners play, which I have no idea how they're going to play, which is really difficult to rank them. If they can get a lot out of the rookie class, then this team's going to be a lot better than the way I've ranked them. But because they have so many rookies and so many prominent roles, it makes me a little bit worried. Like Jefferson, like Gladney, these guys that are in really prominent roles as rookies, it's something that the Vikings have not had to deal with in quite some time. They have maybe the best safety duo in the league with Smith and Harris, but depending on their corner play, it might not matter. So the Vikings are really interesting. Their quarterback coach grade is actually pretty good overall because Cousins is like a pretty good quarterback, not a great quarterback, and Zimmer is the same. A pretty good coach, especially defensively, very good, but overall, just pretty good. So they'll be a good team. I just don't know if they're going to be a great team in 2020. Coming in just one spot ahead of the Minnesota Vikings, actually by tiebreaker, is the Green Bay Packers. Yes, the Packers and the Vikings, again, are that close. They came in with the same score, with 48 overall, but they rank just slightly in terms of their quarterback and coach grade, because I do believe Rodgers is a better quarterback than Cousins, but I don't see LaFleur being a better coach than Zimmer. Collectively, though, they are 1 point ahead of the Vikings with a 13 quarterback coach grade, and the Vikings had a 14. So super, super close are these two teams. I feel like the Vikings, from a collective whole, are a little bit more talented than the Packers, but the Packers, they still have some talent, and I do feel like they have very strong units in certain areas. Like Rodgers is still probably the second best quarterback in this conference. And yes, they drafted Jordan Love, but I don't think that changes anything when it comes to Rodgers. It might only motivate him. Their secondary is a top 3 unit in this conference. Jari Alexander is probably the elite corner in the league that nobody talks about. And I really like their safeties as well, with Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage, who I think is only going to get better. You also throw in a guy like Kevin King and Sullivan, who play nice roles for this defense as well. If King can get a little bit better, who's still a young player, then this unit can go from really good to almost great levels. And Sullivan's an underrated player for all that he does for this defense, playing a little bit of nickel, a little bit of linebacker, and being that versatile piece. I also would look for them to bring back Tramon Williams as another piece to this secondary as well. Now, their front seven was very difficult to rank because they have a great pass rush with Preston Smith and Zadarian Smith, but they don't really have a great run defense, as we've seen multiple times last year. Kenny Clark's a stud, but their interior defensive line is not very good and does not have a lot of depth. Can they get more out of Rashawn Gary this year is a huge question. And the linebacker position is still very thin with pretty much only Christian Kirksey, who's a decent player. Offensive line is a little bit worse because Balaga's gone. They replaced him with Ricky Wagner, who's a capable starter, but not the player that Balaga is. Tight end, they still don't really have anybody. Running back, Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, but again, really only added Devin Funchess as a weapon. I would have liked to have seen another weapon added to this offense. Overall, Packers are about the same team they were last year, but they're just going to have to deal with a more difficult schedule and possibly a grumpy Rodgers. We'll have to see how that affects the rest of the team, but they do come in here in terms of their talent at number 8 in the NFC. At number 7, the most shocking entry of my rankings for the NFC conference is the Detroit Lions. Yeah, I didn't think the Detroit Lions would be this high, honestly. in my rankings, because I honestly don't know at the end of the day if I'm going to be saying, are the Lions going to win the NFC North? Like, that's a bold statement. I actually think that they're a good team to bet on based on their odds right now. But if I had to actually say a gun to my head, would I pick the Lions to win this win this division? Probably not, right? But they ranked first in my rankings, so that's what I'm going with. They came in with a 46 in terms of their collective score, which is 2 points higher than both the Vikings and the Packers. But they do have the lowest quarterback coach score with a 17, mostly because Matt Patricia has not proven that he can be a good head coach. But Matt Stafford I had as the third best quarterback in this entire conference, only behind Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers. So that helped in terms of their score. Now, what are they good at? I think the number one area that I felt they rank very high in the NFC is their secondary. Their secondary is quite good, especially in this system that Patricia plays. And I think they've gotten a lot better over the course of this offseason by adding Jeff Okudah in the top 5, who I feel could be a legitimate shutdown corner. Maybe not right away, but pretty quickly. Like, we've seen these corners like Lattimore and Denzel Ward just in recent seasons play really well right away. And I think Okudah could have a similar impact, especially considering a lot of analysts feel he is better than those players. Now, Daron Harmon is going to be a big-time impact safety for them. He's a key playmaker in key moments, and I think he gives Patricia that deep safety that he really needs to help this system that they haven't had since he's been there, really. I think Trufant is going to perform really well at the opposite corner spot this season. I think him being in more of a man-to-man system and defensive scheme is actually going to help him flourish as a corner, and Justin Coleman's still one of the better slot corners in the game. So as a secondary, they're really good. Now, they've added to their front 7, which helped them a little bit, but I still feel like I'm worried about that pass rush. They need to find somebody outside of Trey Flowers that can really get after the quarterback. And Flowers, that's not really where he's dominant either, but he is really good as an interior pass rush. Okora is just a solid player. They have a lot of solid players up front. Like Danny Shelton's a solid player, more so a run defender than a pass rusher, but he's going to fit this system that they run in Detroit because he was really good in New England, especially last season. And Julian Okora, as a draft pick, I love this pick, but can he be an impact player as a rookie? That's a tough ask. That's a tough question. Jamie Collins will also help the pass rush because he can do a lot in terms of being a linebacker or a pass rusher. Can they get more out of the linebacker position as well is another question. But they were a very injured team last year, especially considering they lost Matt Stafford for most of the season. And like I said, he's a stud. I expect Hawkinson to have a much better year this year than he did in his rookie year, as tight ends typically grow up fast in the NFL. From their first season to their second season, they take a huge jump. Wide receivers are very good with Golladay and Marvin Jones, a great duo, and you still have Danny Amendola there in the slot, and Allison was added to the group as well. Offensive line is really underrated compared to some of these other teams in the NFC. I felt like the AFC offensive line is a lot better than the NFC. Tackle position is pretty good. I think Vaitai is getting underrated for that pickup. I really like that pickup, especially in the run game. And then Frank Ragnow is really good at center. Decker's solid at left tackle. The guard positions had a lot of different players added to it this offseason. And overall last year, their offensive line, even without Stafford, was pretty good. And you added Swift to the running back group. So the Lions are a good team. The Lions have a lot of talent. It's just a matter of, can Matt Patricia put the pieces together? And can they stay healthy? And can they win those division games? That's going to be it for the Lions at the end of the day. I like them a lot. I'm a little uncertain about where they're ranked here. I think it's maybe a little bit high, but that's the way it came out. So that's the way I'm going to put it, at number 7 for Detroit. Coming in at number 6 in the NFC is the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks fans may feel like they should be a little bit higher, but other NFL fans may feel they should be a little bit lower. I feel like the Seahawks are a team that everybody respects, but sometimes people look at them as Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, and not much else. And for me, I feel like that is somewhat true, but also somewhat not true at the same time. Now, when it comes to the Seahawks, what they're great at is that coach and quarterback combination. They finished number 1 in terms of their score for coach and quarterback. Russell Wilson is the best quarterback in the NFC, and Pete Carroll is probably the 3rd or possibly 4th best coach in the NFC. This team is led by those two guys, but they also have other players in the mix. I feel like their secondary has improved, which helped their ranking. Their front seven is hard to judge because do they have enough right now in terms of their pass rush? It feels like Clowney is not coming back, so is Bruce Irvin enough? Are they going to add potentially a guy like Everson Griffin, which I think would help their ranking a ton? What they really need is that number one pass rusher, and I don't know if they have that right now, but I feel like they have some depth there. You know, Mayowa, they have Jerron Reed, Green, these guys that are decent players, but they need that stud that I feel like can fill out the entire unit. So I'm a little skeptical on the D-line, but the linebacker position is very good, especially after adding Jordan Brooks in the first round. And Bobby Wagner's a stud. We know that KJ Wright is still there. But again, to the secondary, you know, Quandre Diggs was a great add in the middle of the season last year, which really helped their secondary. But you add a great slot corner in the mix as well, like Quinton Dunbar, alongside Griffin, who had a great year last year. This is a secondary that I think could be a lot better, which was a big weakness for them last season. So if that secondary can play really well, the pass rush won't have to be as great. Offensively, their O-line is still one of the worst in this conference. I'm sorry. Dwayne Brown is really good, but outside of that, I just don't see it. Running backs and receivers are very good. You know, Chris Carson, Rashad Penny, if they can be healthy at the start of the year, it's a good unit. Tight ends, Greg Olsen, that's going to help them out. And also just getting healthier at that position with Will Dissly, that's going to help them. Wide receiver, adding Philip Dorsett, I think was a nice move, but I really like the combo of Lockett and Metcalf. I think mostly because their defense is quite average. They didn't rank as high as possibly I would have ranked them without the criteria, because when you talk about this team, you begin and end with they have Russell Wilson, he carries the team, and they have Pete Carroll, who's a proven winner in the NFL. So it can't come out on paper how much those players and those coaches are so great. They rank here at number 6, tied with Detroit in terms of points, but they, again, have the highest quarterback coach grade in the entire conference, which is huge when it comes down to the playoffs. At number 5, entering the top 5, is the Philadelphia Eagles. And something to point out about the Eagles compared to the recent teams from number 6 to number 9, where we had Minnesota, Green Bay, Detroit, and Seattle, all collectively with a very similar score, from 48 to 46, all within the same range. Once you get to Philadelphia, they jump up drastically in my rankings to 32, a 32 grade, which is an elite grade across both conferences when you compare it AFC and NFC, and they have the second best quarterback coach grade in this conference, even above teams like New Orleans and Tampa Bay. The Eagles are a really talented team. I feel like injuries hurt them a ton last year. I had really high expectations for them last year, and injuries kind of hurt that. I also feel like the bad on this team has gotten a lot better. Their secondary was a huge reason they were not a great team last year. If they had the secondary they have now last year, we're talking about something different. And if Carson Wentz doesn't go down in that playoff game, we're talking about something different potentially, where they could have pulled off that upset versus Seattle. You never know, but it was definitely possible. And I think Carson Wentz really showed me a lot last year. At the end of the year, he carried this football team because they had no weapons. And I think this offseason, they've done a great job of adding speed and playmakers around him to make this offense a lot scarier. Whether that's Rieger in the first round, Deshaun Jackson will be back from injury. Alshon Jeffrey should be back and healthier, although I don't feel he's the same player. Marquise Goodwin was added for that playmaker down the field, Olympic speed, as I've said many times. Hightower's another interesting playmaker in the 5th. And can they get anything out of Arcega-Whiteside, or will he be cut? That's a big question as well. But overall, a lot more speed, a lot more playmakers, and don't sleep on the guys that really were effective for them at the end of the year. The running back position, Miles Sanders should take a step forward. Offensive line-wise, might be a little bit worse, but they're still in the top 3 in the conference. Andre Dillard, I like a lot. I think he can fill in for Jason Peters from last year. And collectively, I mean, Jason Kelsey, Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson, those guys are like top 3 at their position across the NFL. So that's the type of offensive line they have. And then the tight ends are ridiculous. You know, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, great combination. They even added a playmaker like Jalen Hurts. Although you might not like that pick so much, he's going to help their offense in certain situations. Now, defensively, I think is where they might be slept on for the moves that they've made. Javon Hargrave. He's a beast. Nobody's talking about this team adding Javon Hargrave next to Fletcher Cox and Malik Jackson, which is just going to be ludicrous pass rush and run defense, to the point where they've drafted so many young, fast linebackers because they're nobody's going to be able to penetrate this defensive line with those guys in the mix in the middle. So let's just get guys that can run around and make tackles, and that's what they've done at the linebacker position. Although I don't love it, and it hurt their grade in the front seven, that D-line is nasty. And then the secondary with Darius Slay and Roby Coleman's a massive upgrade to the corner position that's going to help their entire defense. And you already know I respect them from their coaching, from Doug Peterson to Schwartz on defense. This is a really good team. I think a lot of people might be sleeping on them because they've been disappointed over the last couple of years how they've done, because everyone's been saying, oh, they're this good, they're this good. And maybe they've been overhyped. But I think this year, improving the weapon group, improving the secondary is really going to improve this collective football team. So at number 5, I have the Philadelphia Eagles with the second best quarterback coach score and the 5th overall best score, the second best in the NFC East. The number 4 team on my NFC rankings is the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys rank one spot higher than the Philadelphia Eagles with 31 points compared to the Eagles' 32 points. Very, very close. And they did have a lower quarterback coach score. So Eagles fans out there, you can compare and contrast based on what you want to. The Dallas Cowboys had a 15, which isn't bad. It's near the top of the NFC. But the Eagles had a lot higher score as the number 2 quarterback coach score. Now, Dallas, I do feel, is a more talented team with not a lot of holes. And they have even less holes when you compare them to Philadelphia. Their offensive line is still stellar, which them and Philadelphia, they go back and forth to me for the number 2 offensive line in this conference. The wide receiver position is off the charts. In terms of their weapons, I believe I ranked them second in my weapons group. They have Amari Cooper, who's a dynamic playmaker who really doesn't get the respect he deserves for how good he is as a route runner, how tough he is to cover one-on-one. Michael Gallup's an elite number 2. CeeDee Lamb is going to be a beast right away in the NFL first-round pick, which I think opens up their entire offense, will help Zeke out. They have Tony Pollard also in the backfield. They added Andy Dalton for a backup quarterback. Love their offense. Their offense is going to be dynamic. It was first in yards last year. I expect them to transfer that more to the points category this year and really go off. Dak should have a great season. Defensively, yes, they lost Robert Quinn, who led them in sacks. Yes, they lost Byron Jones at the corner position, but they might be better as a collective whole defensively. They have a better coach, in my opinion, both at head coach and defensive coordinator, with adding Mike Nolan to the mix in defense and adding Mike McCarthy, offensive coach. Collective coaches won a Super Bowl, so their coaching will be a heck of a lot better, which helped them in this grade. The defensive line, yes, doesn't have DeMarcus Lawrence, but it actually might be deeper than it was last year. When you look at Tyron Crawford, Dontari Poe, you add McCoy in the middle, DeMarcus is still there, and you have guys like Tristan Hill, a great pick in Gallimore. You still have Aldon Smith, who you signed, who could be a boomer bust guy. Gregory is another boomer bust. If Aldon Smith or Gregory work out, you're not missing Robert Quinn whatsoever. So they have a really deep defensive line that I don't think enough people are talking about. And their linebacker position is still really good with Van Der Esch and Jalen Smith and Sean Lee, who came back on a smaller contract. Didn't expect him to be back, but he's back. You add Diggs to the cornerback group to hopefully help replace Byron Jones. But even without Byron Jones, this was still one of the best corner groups in the NFC, a conference that's not as great as the AFC in terms of their secondaries, but they can still cover man-to-man, they can cover in zone, and you add Clinton-Dix to the safety position, which I feel is a huge upgrade to that position. So the Cowboys are loaded on offense, they're loaded on defense. Jerry Jones, the Jones family, done a great job, and I think their coaching has gotten a lot better, and I think Dak will only take more strides. If they can score points like they should, I mean, this team's scary, so at number 4, I have the Dallas Cowboys, and they definitely could be number 1 by year's end. They have a ton of potential, maybe more potential than anybody on this list. So the Dallas Cowboys at number 4, just one spot ahead of the Philadelphia Eagles, which that will be a battle in the NFC East. Entering the top 3 in the NFC, at number 3, a team that I feel some people would have at number 1. That is the New Orleans Saints. And honestly, before I did this criteria, I might have put them number 1, but Again, letting the criteria speak for itself. At number 3 is the New Orleans Saints. They come in with a 26, which is 5 points higher than the Dallas Cowboys at number 4. So this top 3 group is very close, and I feel kind of separate from the 4 and 5 teams and so on. So at number 3, the Saints. The Saints come in with the number 3 quarterback coach grade with 8. I think really talented team overall, and honestly, their roster is better going into this year than last year. And last year, they were dominant in the regular season. They just really weren't dominant in the playoffs. And they were upset again by the Minnesota Vikings, who they can't seem to get past in the big moment. And that's starting to concern me a little bit. But their offensive line was the most elite unit on this team, ranking at number 1. Their front 7 was a lot better than I expected it to rank overall, because they have a solid linebacker group, which they've added Bond to in the draft. Demario Davis is a stud. And the defensive line is pretty deep, honestly. You know, Cameron Jordan, Davenport, who was injured last year, who I think will have a really good year in year number 3 in his NFL career. The defensive tackle position itself, with Rankins, Onyemata, Marcus Hunt was added to the team, Malcolm Brown. They have a lot of players at the defensive line. I mean, they can get after you, and they can also stop the run better than almost any team in the league. Their secondary is really their biggest weakness, in my opinion, because I don't think their corner position is quite as full as it should be. And maybe they'll add somebody down the line here, but I just don't see, especially the number 3 cornerback spot. You have Marshawn Lattimore, who I like as the number 1, who's a true shutdown-esque type of corner, maybe not truly elite, like top 5, but he's probably somewhere in the top 15. And then the opposite side, Janoris Jenkins, who is a nice add at the end of the year. He could be good, but I understand he's getting older and he'll be a little iffy. But you have him, which that's fine. The number 3 spot, I don't know who it's going to be. Is it going to be Robinson, like PJ Williams? I don't know if I love either player as the number 3 corner. The safety position is pretty good, though. You added Malcolm Jenkins. Marcus Williams is really good. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is coming into his own as a young player. Of course, you have Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas. You added Emmanuel Sanders, Jared Cook. They have one of the best set of weapons. I think they rank 3rd overall in the NFC, just below Tampa Bay and Dallas. This is a great team, great roster. You could argue they're number 1. They rank here at number 3. At number 2 in the NFC, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, ranking just 1 spot ahead of the New Orleans Saints, which I believe is going to be a back-and-forth battle in the NFC South. That's going to probably be my favorite rivalry of this entire 2020 season. The Bucs come in with 1 point higher than the New Orleans Saints, 25 points to Saints 26 points. The Bucs did rank lower with the quarterback coach score. I had Brady 1 spot ahead of Breeze, but I had Peyton a couple spots ahead of Bruce Arians. Arians is a great coach. I think the Bucs have a really good coaching staff, which, you know, Todd Bowles and so on. But the Saints with Sean Payton, I had to give them the slight edge there. So they came in with the 4th best coach quarterback score, below the Eagles, Seahawks, Saints, and then the Bucs. But the rest of their team ranked higher than the Saints. I had the weapons as the number 1 weapons in the NFC, and you could argue maybe even potentially the league. And the big reason here is because of their wide receivers, tight ends, really, those 2 groups mostly. The running back position, I think Ronald Jones is a little underrated, the way people value him, but the running back position is not the main reason they're this high, right? You have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who you could argue are both top 10 receivers. I love the pick of Tyler Johnson. I think he's going to be a productive slot receiver almost right away. Scotty Miller's underrated, and Justin Watson is there as well. So very deep receiver group, especially the top 2 that just stick out. They have 3 tight ends in Gronk, OJ Howard, and Cameron Brate, who are going to give their offense so much flexibility. Their offensive line is super underrated. PFF, I think, ranked them in the top 10 last year, and people were talking about how they need to protect Brady and all this stuff. They addressed their one weakness, right tackle, Tristan Wirfs. This is a good offensive line across the board, especially Ryan Jensen and Marpet, who are both elite at their positions. Now you add Wirfs in the first round. You have Donovan Smith at left tackle. If Kappa can really get better and improve from last year, who's still a young player, they're going to be a dominant offensive line, not just a good one. Defensively, their front 7 is elite. I think I ranked them 4th in the NFC, something around there, in the top 5. They have the sack leader in Shaq Barrett, Jason Pierre-Paul on the opposite side. the duo of White and David. And then you have Sue and Vita Vea in the front. I mean, this is a phenomenal front seven as well. The biggest question is secondary. And really, when you take a look at the secondaries in the NFC, they're one of the 5 best units. People are like, I just don't think they know these players that well. Like, Dean is a young player. He's a second-year player, but he was phenomenal in his rookie year, and he'll only get better, I would assume, in his second year. Carlton Davis is going to get even better this year, and he was really good last year. And they add back Justin Evans, who was injured last year. They add Antoine Winfield Jr., who I think is going to be a stud right away at free safety. Their real only weakness in the secondary. They're deep in the secondary at corner and at safety, and their front seven's already phenomenal. I mean, this team doesn't really have any holes. Sure, would you love a great running back on this team? Sure, but I don't think that really matters. Would you love a better right guard? Maybe. Like, they don't have basically any holes. If Tom Brady can play like Tom Brady, this team's definitely going to be in the mix for one of the best teams in the NFC, and I rank them here at number 2 because offense is very good, elite, and defense, I think, will shock some people how good they are. They rank number 1 in run defense, and their pass defense under Todd Bowles is only going to get better. The number 1 team in my NFC rankings remains the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers come in 3 points higher than the Bucs, 4 points higher than the Saints, and with a 12 in the quarterback coach score. The 49ers to me are just a really well-balanced roster. They don't have a lot of holes. Would I love them to have one number 1 wide receiver that's a game breaker? Yeah, probably. Would I love them to have another corner who can shut it down? Yeah, maybe, but I'm just nitpicking here. This team is really good, really well-rounded. They still have the best front seven in this entire conference with their linebacker play, which I think is a little underrated, led by Alexander. And their pass rush is probably still the best in the league. Yes, they swapped Kinlaw for Buckner, which is probably a decline in the short term. But Nick Bosa probably will be even better this year. D Ford will be healthier this year. And Armstead is still a stud. And they have the depth there. The 49ers, they're just good. I don't really know what else to say. Jimmy Ward had a great breakout year at free safety. Richard Sherman was like his old self at corner. And really, their cornerback group, their secondary, I actually ranked first in this conference. And that's really the thing that people talk about as their weakness. But when you compare them to the rest of the NFC, tell me a team that's better. I mean, honestly, like, yes, they're worse than some AFC teams. But in terms of the NFC, their secondary played off the charts last year. And yes, it helps to have that pass rush. But the way that they design their scheme defensively, these guys fit the mold and fit the scheme very well. Offensive line is good. George Kittle, they have a group of good running backs. If Garoppolo can take a step forward, then this team is going to be back where they were last year. Now, if Garoppolo is the same as last year, you could see them decline. It's really going to be hard for them to decline, though, because Kyle Shanahan is such an epically great coach, who I rank number 1 in this conference. And Deebo Samuel is going to get better. They're going to have some playmakers that I think people are sleeping on back, like Trent Taylor, for example, or Jalen Hurd, who didn't get to play last year. So this team's an exciting team still. They're still, in my opinion, according to these rankings, according to the criteria, the best team in the NFC collectively as a unit. And that's what matters in the NFL. 49ers ranked number 1 as the best team in the NFC. Hope you guys enjoyed my rankings for the entire NFC conference from number 1 to number 16, from number 16 to number 1. If you did, Gronk spike the like button and subscribe to the channel for more. It's Mitch. Peace.